He thought of her dribbling wine into his mouth, felt himself grow even harder to cup his testicles. She had him by the balls. What is she about to pull right now? Okay, so she's got music playing, acting all happy, cooking dinner for her hubby that she's just found out is going to testify for the other side in court in the trial of her daughter's murder. Hello and welcome back to another episode of our book club series. If you're new here and you don't know who I am, my name is Brooke. I have different types of content on my channel. What you are watching is a continuation of our book club series. We are reading The Pact by Jodi Picoult. We read chapters of the book together and then we discuss the characters, the drama, and our theories about what we think might be going to happen. So if you enjoy books and book discussions, then stick around because you will definitely enjoy this type of content. If you want to catch up to where we're at right now in the book and the discussion, there is a playlist on my channel called Book Club The Pact. All of the videos from the beginning of this book club series up until now are in order on that playlist. If you really want to cringe, you can go over there and watch all of those videos. You can also search the hashtag book club series and all the videos will come up that way as well. Or if you prefer to just watch the last few videos leading up to this one and then jump in from there, you're welcome to do that as well. However you choose to catch up, we would love to have you join in with us. I always do a quick recap of the last few sentences that we read in the last video just so that we're all up to speed and everybody knows what's going on. Other than that, today is reading number 21. I can't believe it. This is so exciting. But anyways, today's reading number 21. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So last time when we ended, Chris's roommate Steve had just been sentenced to life in prison. Chris is pretty upset. I mean, he's upset for a lot of reasons. Of course, he's on trial for murder as well. So he's upset about that. He's upset about like losing a friend because he's never gonna see Steve again. He has a lot going on and he's just like really upset. So the jail guard comes in to come collect Steve's things and take them out. And then Chris starts crying. And it was when Chris found out, and then he just starts crying and he's alone in his cell. So we're gonna move on to the next section now. At first, Barry Delaney had called Melanie often, giving her updates on evidence that had dribbled from the ME's office or the forensics lab. Then the telephone calls had been made from Melanie's end periodically, just to keep Emily on Miss Delaney's mind now. Just to keep Emily on Miss Delaney's mind. Now, Melanie called maybe once a month, not wanting to take from the prosecutor any amount of precious time that would be better served preparing for the trial. So Melanie was rather surprised when Barry Delaney tracked her all the way to the library to talk to her. She picked up the phone, certain that the other librarian had gotten the caller's name wrong, only to hear the prosecutor's clear, clipped voice. "Hi," Melanie said. "How is everything?" "I should be asking you that," Barry said. "Actually, everything is fine." "Have they changed the date of the trial?" "Oh no, still set for May." She sighed into the phone. "You see, Miss Gold, I was wondering if you might be able to help me with a bit of research." "Anything," Melanie assured her. "What do you need?" "It's your husband. He's agreed to testify for the defense." So this is, oh my God, so this is the first time Melanie has found out that Michael is going to testify on Chris's behalf. This is, okay, I don't know how this is about to go. Here we go. Here we go. All right. It's your husband. So here, let's just talk about this for a second. So Barry Delaney is on the prosecution side. I think she's the assistant attorney general. So she's working with Melanie, Emily's mom, to charge Chris with the murder of Emily, right? We're all on the same page there. So she calls Melanie up, I guess, because she has now found out that Michael, Melanie's husband and Emily's father, has said he is going to testify for the defense. Melanie is finding this out now, that her husband, the father of the dead girl, is going to testify on behalf of Chris, the boyfriend, who's in jail awaiting trial for the murder of Emily. Making sure that we're all on the same page. Okay. So, okay. It's your husband. He's agreed to testify for the defense. Melanie was silent for so long that the prosecutor began calling her name. I'm still here, she said faintly, remembering Gus at the cemetery, certain she'd put Michael up to this. She felt her head start to pound. What can I do? Ideally, you can get him to back down, Barry said. And if he refuses, maybe you can find out what he's going to say that's so useful to the defense. By now, Melanie's head was bowed, her forehead grazing the reference desk. I see, she said, although she did not. And how do I do this? Well, Miss Gold, the prosecutor said, I guess that's up to you. Oh shit. Okay, next section. The first thing Michael noticed when he entered the house, sweaty and tired and reeking of sheep dip, was that the stereo was on. After months of prolonged silence, music seemed sacrilegious, and he had the absurd urge to turn it off. But then he came around the corner of the kitchen and found Melanie chopping vegetables, the jeweled tones of the peppers dotting the countertop like confetti. Hi, she said brightly, so much like the woman she'd been a year ago that Michael started. You hungry? Famished, he said, his mouth dry. He heard the swell of a horn on the CD and resisted the desire to reach out his hand and touch Melanie to make sure she was really there. Go clean up, she said. I've got a nice lamb ragu cooking. What's she about to do? Has she gone crazy? Hold up. Let's pause here for a second. Has Melanie gone psycho? Is she losing it? She might be losing it. What is she about to pull right now? Okay, so she's got music playing, like acting all happy, cooking dinner for her hubby that she's just found out is going to testify for the other side in court in the trial of her daughter's murder. And she's like cooking him dinner with music playing. I think she's lost it, guys. What do you think? He walked up to the bathroom like an automation, his head spinning. That was what he had heard of about grief, after all. It could change a person drastically. Then, one day, they'd be all right. It had certainly been that way for him. Maybe it was Melanie's turn to come back to life. He has no idea. He has no idea. I think she's about to go psycho on his ass. Do you guys think she's about to go psycho on his ass right now? Why is she so calm? I don't know. What do y'all think? Put it in the comments. It had certainly been that way for him. Maybe it was Melanie's turn to come back to life. As he soaped himself in the shower and lathered his hair with shampoo, he kept envisioning Melanie as he'd seen her in the kitchen, her back to him, the curve of her spine graceful beneath her turtleneck, the highlights in her hair winking gold and roan and russet in the afternoon sun. He came out in a towel, only to find Melanie sitting on the bed with 2 steaming plates and 2 glasses of red wine. She was wearing a green silk robe that he remembered from a second honeymoon a million years ago, its sash slipping open. I thought you might not want to wait, she said. He swallowed. For what? He asked. Melanie smiled. The ragu. She stood up, the colorful delicacy on the plates jiggling with the movement of the mattress, and lifted a glass of wine. Want some? When Michael nodded, she took a sip and then leaned up to kiss him, letting the wine run over his lips and into his throat. He thought he was going to come right then and there. It had been months since he'd made love with Melanie, as long as his daughter had been dead. He would have jumped at the invitation to share a bed with her, but this was not Melanie. In all the years they had been married, Melanie had never been one to initiate sex. He thought of her dribbling wine into his mouth, felt himself grow even harder, and then wondered what book she'd stolen that from. Seducing him. Okay, I like it. Seducing him maybe to try to get some answers. We don't know. Before he could stop himself, he laughed. Melanie's eyes flickered. Someone who did not know her as well as Michael might have missed the indecision that widened her pupils for that fraction of a second. To her credit, and his shock, She put the glass of wine down, reached for the back of his head, and tugged him down for a kiss. He felt the robe open. Her nipples peeked against his chest. He felt her tongue curl into his mouth and her fingers stroke the nape of his neck. And then he felt her other hand slide between them to cup his testicles. She had him by the balls. Suddenly, he understood why Melanie was cooking ragu, wearing silk, and making love to him. She had not changed overnight. She only wanted something. He lifted his head and drew back. Melanie made a sharp, teeny sound and opened her eyes. "What's the matter?" she asked. "How about," Michael murmured, "you tell me?" He saw her looking at him. He felt her surprise as his penis grew flaccid in her grip. She tightened her grasp almost cruelly and then let him go, jerking the lapels of her robe closed. "You're going to be a defense witness," she hissed. "Your own daughter's dead, and you're going to stick up for her killer." "That's what this is about?" Michael said, incredulous. "Did you think if you fucked me that you could change my mind?" "I don't know," Melanie cried, her hands buried in her hair. "I thought that maybe you wouldn't do it, that you'd owe it to me." Michael blinked at her, stunned that in a marriage which had lasted 20 years, she could even think of using sex as a down payment instead of a gift. Wanting to hurt Melanie as badly as she had hurt him, Michael schooled his face into a careful blank. "You flatter yourself," he said, and walked out of the room. He was naked, but that didn't matter. He stalked across the house and up the connecting staircase to the offices of his veterinary practice. There he dressed in the scrubs he wore sometimes for surgeries and sat down at his desk. He could hear the quiet clatter of Melanie in the kitchen. His hands were shaking as he picked up the phone and dialed. Aw, shit. Y'all think he's calling Gus? Is he calling Gus? He's calling Gus. Well, I don't know. We'll see. Next section. Gus walked into the Happy Family restaurant and immediately strode toward the booth in the back that they all used to frequent on Friday nights. Michael was sitting there in a pair of green scrubs, drinking what looked to be straight vodka. "Michael?" she said, and he lifted his head. She had seen that look before, but she couldn't quite place it. The vague set of the eyes, the small parenthetic downturns at the edges of the mouth. It took her a moment to recognize it as despair, an expression she'd seen on Chris's face before he remembered to pull his mask of indifference into place. "You came," Michael said. "I said I would." He had called her at home, risky to begin with, and begged her to meet him right away. Trying to pick a familiar public venue that wouldn't be too busy at this time of day, she suggested the Chinese restaurant. It was only as she was driving there, having lied to James and Kate, that she realized how crowded it would be with memories. "It's Melanie," Michael said, and Gus's eyes widened. "She's all right?" "I don't know. I guess that depends on your frame of reference," he said. He told Gus what had happened. By the time he finished, Gus's face was pink. She remembered, not so long ago, laughing with Melanie over coffee, discussing width versus length and other abstractions about sex that seemed too close for comfort right now. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "you knew she was going to find out if you testified." "Yeah, I don't think that's what upset me, really." He looked up at Gus, his eyes clouded. "It's just that this very horrible thing has happened to the two of us, you see. And I guess I always figured that if it came to this, we'd band together. Ride out the storm." He stared down at the placemat, festively decorated with a Chinese calendar wheel. The year of the rat, of the ox, of the horse. "Do you know what it's like to give your whole self to a person and your whole heart to boot until you've got nothing left to give, and then realize that it still isn't what they need?" "Yes," Gus said simply. "I do know." She reached across the table and clasped both of Michael's hands, giving him strength. And they thought separately of Melanie and of James, and of how a stream of difference between two people might, overnight, turn into a canyon. They were still holding hands when the waiter came over to take their order. "Mrs.? Mister?" he crowed, a wide smile splitting his face as Gus and Michael jumped apart. "It be many times since you be here to eat," he said, his voice a pigeon sing-song. "When are coming the other couple?" Gus stared at the waiter, open-mouthed. It was Michael who realized the mistake that had been made. Oh my God. So they went, y'all, oh shit. They went out to eat at the place where they all used to go out to eat together. Gus and James, and Chris and Kate, their family, and Michael and Melanie and Emily and their family all used to go out to eat together, right, at this place. And for some reason, I think Gus picked this place. Either way, that's where they ended up going out to eat, y'all. I don't know what's going on up here, but okay. "It be many times since you be here to eat," he said, his voice a pigeon sing-song. "When are coming the other couple?" It was Michael who realized the mistake that had been made. "Oh, no," he said, smiling. "We're not married. We are, that is, but not to each other." Gus nodded. "The other two, the ones who aren't here," she said, and then broke off as the waiter smiled beatifically at them, unwilling or unable to understand. Michael rested his palm on the menu. "Chicken and broccoli," he said, "and more vodka." In the awkward silence that followed the waiter's disappearance to the kitchen, Gus slid her hands under the table, still tingling with Michael's touch. Michael tapped his chopsticks against the edge of the vodka glass. "He thought that you and I were..." "Yes," Gus said, "funny." But she was staring down at her placemat, at the odd Chinese calendar, and wondering if the waiter was not the only one who had thought that spouses were interchangeable. It was a logical mistake, after all. Anyone who'd seen the hearts and the golds here for years, and the rapport between the four of them, could have come to the same conclusion. Gus peeked at Michael over the edge of her teacup, considering his thick silver hair, his capable square hands, his heart. She had come to Michael tonight because he'd needed her. It felt perfectly natural, after all. He was almost a member of the family, which was, in itself, a little horrifying and incestuous. The heavy china cup clanked onto the table as it slipped out of Gus's hand. Both she and Michael had felt the odd, simultaneous ease and discomfort of this attraction, but they were old enough to move away from each other when reality, in the form of a Chinese waiter, intruded. It might not be as simple for someone younger. Who was to say that Emily hadn't felt it, too, blithely pushed into a romance with a boy who might as well have been her brother, pregnant with his child? Gus closed her eyes and offered up a quick prayer, suddenly realizing what no one else had been able to for many months. Why the bright, lively, intelligent Emily Gold might have been confused enough to take her own. Oddly enough, Gus, Chris's mom, is the first one to, realize what was going on, some of what was going on in Emily's mind. So Gus, has this revelation while she's eating out at the Chinese restaurant with Michael in secret. And she finally realizes, oh shit, that's what it was. So we've learned, in previous readings, in previous videos, that Emily had there was this weird dichotomy going on in her head where she loved Chris because they grew up together and, he's attractive and whatever, all these great qualities, fantastic, wonderful, good qualities. So she loves him, but she also feels like he's a brother to her because they've been together for their entire fucking lives, right? So she just kept feeling really weird, every time they would have, romantic encounters, because she can't get this out of her head that, she feels like he's like a brother. So she was struggling with that, and then also she ends up pregnant with this kid and doesn't tell anyone. So she's struggling with that as well internally. And Gus, of all people, Gus picks up on this just now at dinner with Michael. It's so random. Okay. Gus closed her eyes and offered up a quick prayer, suddenly realizing what no one else had been able to for many months. Why the bright, lively, intelligent Emily Gold might have been confused enough to take her own life. Okay, so it looks like we're doing a flashback now. It says then, October 1997. So yeah, this is a flashback to when Emily's still alive. The first time Emily told Chris that she wanted to herself, Chris laughed. The second time, he pretended he didn't hear. The third time, he listened. They had been driving home from a late movie, and Emily had fallen asleep. She was doing that a lot these days, Chris realized, nodding off in the middle of the evening, sleeping so late in the morning that Chris had to wake her up before driving her to school, once even dozing off in class. Her head was balanced lightly on his shoulder as he drove. Her body canted sideways over the stick shift between the bucket seats. Chris kept his left hand on the wheel, his right bent at a strange angle to cradle Emily's head and keep it from bobbing all over the place. He needed both hands to get off the highway, and he let go of Emily only to have her slip off his shoulder and settle in his lap. Her ear pressed against the ring of his belt, her breasts nestled against the gear shift, her nose an inch from the steering wheel. Her head was heavy and warm, and as he drove through the silent streets of Bainbridge, he rested his hand on it, brushing her hair back from her face. He turned into her driveway and cut the motor and the lights, watching her sleep. He traced the pink of her ear, so fragile that Chris could see the slight blue veins webbing it. Could imagine the traveling blood. "Hey," he said softly, "wake up." She did, with a start, and would have smashed her head on the steering wheel if Chris's hand wasn't there to stop her. She struggled upright, Chris's hand still on the back of her neck. Emily stretched. There was a deep red furrow on her left cheek, a scar carved by the edge of his belt. "Why didn't you wake me up before?" she said, her voice husky. Chris smiled at her. "You looked too cute," he said, and he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It was nothing, a compliment like 1,000 others he'd given her, and yet she burst into tears. Stunned, Chris reached across the stick shift, trying as best as he could to gather her into his arms. "Emily," he said, "tell me." She shook her head. He felt the slight movement against his shoulder. Then she drew back, wiping her nose with the back of her sleeve. "It's you," she said. "You are what I'm going to miss." It seemed a strange way to say it. "I miss you" would have made more sense, but Chris smiled. "We can visit," he said. "That's why colleges have long breaks, you know." She laughed, although it might have been a sob. "I'm not talking about college. I keep trying to tell you," Emily said haltingly, "but you don't listen." "Tell me what?" "I don't want to be here," Emily said. Chris reached for the ignition key. "It's early. We can go somewhere else," he said, a thrum of alarm working its way up his spine. "No," Emily said, turning to him. "I don't want to be." He sat in silence, his throat working, his mind replaying the other, dismissed things Emily had said that had been leading up to this, and he saw what he had been trying so hard not to see. For someone who knew Emily as well as he did, he saw that she'd been acting different. "Why?" he managed. Emily bit her lip. "Do you believe that I would tell you everything I could?" Chris nodded. "I can't take it anymore. I just want it to be over." "Want what to be over? What is it?" "I can't tell you," Emily choked out. "Oh God, we've never lied, you and me. Maybe we haven't always told each other everything, but we've never lied." "Okay," Chris said, his hands trembling. "Okay." He felt himself spinning out of his body, like the time he'd smacked his head on the edge of the high diving board and had passed out, grasping at the most ordinary things, like the air and the view right in front of his eyes, and knowing he wasn't going to be able to keep it from dissolving. He said, swallowing. His voice just another shadow in the car. Is this about yourself?" And when Emily looked away, his lungs swelled up like balloons, and the bottom dropped out of his world, "You can't," Chris said after a minute, stunned that he'd made any sound at all, with his lips so rubbery and thick. "I'm not talking about this," he thought, "because if I talk about it, it will really be happening." Emily wasn't sitting across from him, pale and beautiful, discussing suicide. He was having a nightmare. He was waiting for the punchline. Yet he could hear his own voice, high and freaked out, already believing. You can't do this, he stammered. You don't just go and kill yourself because you're feeling crappy one day. You don't decide something like that out of the blue. It's not out of the blue, Emily said evenly, and it's not one day, she smiled. It feels good to talk about it. It isn't so bad to think about when I say it out loud. Chris's nostrils flared, and he yanked open his car door. I'm going to talk to your parents. No, Emily cried. So much fear in that one word that Chris immediately stopped. Please don't, she murmured. They won't get it. I don't get it, Chris said heatedly. But you'll listen, she said, and for the first time in 5 minutes, something made sense to Chris. Of course he'd listen. He'd do anything for her. And her parents, well, she was right. At 17, the smallest crisis took on tremendous proportions. Someone else's thoughts could take root in the loam of your own mind. Having someone accept you was as vital as oxygen. Adults, light years away from this, rolled their eyes and smirked and said, "This too shall pass," as if adolescence was a disease like chickenpox, something everyone recalled as a mild nuisance, completely forgetting how painful it had been at the time. There were mornings Chris woke up in a sweat, full to bursting with life, panting as if he'd run all the way up to the top of a cliff. There were days when he felt like he could not fit inside his own skin. There were nights when he was terrified of living up to the model of what he was turning out to be, needing more than anything to breathe in the drugging shampoo scent of Emily's hair, and just as unwilling to admit it. But he could not explain this to anyone, least of all his parents. And Emily, just because she was Emily, clung to him and rode out the storm until he could come up for air. He was all at once panicked and proud that Em would take him into her confidence. It escaped him, for the moment, that she had not been able to tell him what was bothering her in the first place. Riding on the crest of her faith, he was tugged by the glory of shutting everyone else out of being Emily's savior. Then he thought of her cutting her wrists open and felt something crack in his chest. This was much bigger than the two of them. There has to be someone, he said, a psychiatrist or something. No, Emily said again, softly. I let you in on this because I've always told you everything. But you can't, her voice faltered. You can't ruin this for me. Tonight is the first night in, God, I don't know how long that I've felt like I can handle this. It's like a really bad pain that you can take, you know, because you've already swallowed the medicine and you can see that it's going to stop hurting soon. What hurts? Chris asked thickly. Everything, Emily said. My head, my heart. Is it because of me? No, she said, her eyes shining again. Not you. He grabbed her then, oblivious of the hard knot of the stick shift between them, and crushed her against his chest. Why would you tell me unless you want me to help you? He whispered. Emily panicked. You won't tell? I don't know. Am I supposed to just sit around and pretend everything's okay until you go and do it? And then say, oh yeah, she did mention something about killing herself. He drew back, his hand over his eyes. Chris, I cannot believe I'm even talking about this. Promise me, Emily said, you won't tell anyone. I can't. The tears that had welled in Emily's eyes spilled over. Promise, she asked again, her hands grabbing small fistfuls of his shirt. For years, he'd been cast as Emily's future protector, as her other half. And although he never imagined himself to be any less than that, he didn't really understand how to fully grow into that role. He suddenly realized that this was his test as much as Emily's, his chance to carry Em safely away. If she trusted him, he could damn well be worthy of it, even if that meant something very different to each of them. He had time. He would get her to talk. He would find out this horrible secret and show her there was another, better way. And eventually everyone, Emily included, would praise him for it. Okay, Chris whispered. I promise. Yet even with Emily pressed against him, he felt a wall come up. So that, skin to skin, he could no longer really feel her. As if she sensed it too, Emily burrowed closer. "I told you," she said quietly, "because I didn't know how not to." Chris looked into her eyes, realizing the strength of her statement. But what difference was there between having Emily try to explain what she wanted to happen, or finding out from a knock at the door that Emily had committed suicide, when the end result was the same? "No," he said calmly, filled with purpose. He took her arms lightly in his hands and shook her. "I am not giving you up." Emily looked at him, and just for a moment he could read her thoughts. Melanie used to say they were like twins, with their own secret, silent language. In that instant, Chris felt her fear and her resignation, and the naughty pain of coming up against a brick wall again and again. She glanced away, and he could breathe again. The thing is, Chris," Emily said, "it's not your choice." We're going to move on to the next section. Chris lunged through the water, warming up at swim practice with 4 laps of freestyle. Swimming had always been good for his mind. There was not much to do in 50 meters but think. He'd memorized the periodic table while swimming his laps, and SAT vocabulary. And he'd even rehearsed the things he'd say to Emily to get her to sleep with him. It's funny. And he'd even rehearsed the things he'd say to Emily to get her to sleep with him. Most of the time, he could keep a lazy rhythm without breaking stride. But thinking about dying, and Emily, made his arms wheel faster and his legs strike the water punishingly, as if he could outrace his thoughts. Finishing, he hoisted himself out of the pool, his heart thundering. He stripped off his goggles and swim cap and scrubbed his towel over his hair, then went to sit on one of the benches that lined the pool. His coach walked up to him, a smirk on his face. "We try to save the record-breaking times for competitions, Hart," he said. "It's just practice. Don't kill yourself." Don't kill yourself. He couldn't let Emily do it. It was that simple. And maybe it was for purely selfish reasons, but surely one day she'd thank him for saving her life. Whatever it was that was bothering her, and what the hell could it be that she wasn't able to tell him, could surely be resolved. Especially if he was there to help her. His eyes widened. That was it. Em wanted his understanding and his silence. If he played along, he'd have a chance to talk her out of doing it, even up to the last minute. He'd pretend that this crazy idea of killing herself was unacceptable, and then, like a white knight, he'd sweep down and save Emily from herself. No one else would ever have to know what had almost happened. And he wouldn't have to break his promise to her about keeping the whole horrible plan to himself. The ends justified the means. It did not occur to Chris that he might not succeed. Feeling much better, he stood up at the sound of his coach's whistle and sleeked into the pool again for another drill. So we just got a peek into Chris's, what's going on in Chris's head. He doesn't want to break her trust and, you know, the confidence that she's put in him because he loves her. He's in love with her. He wants to save her. He wants to be with her. He wants to save her. And I guess he's afraid that telling other people would just make it worse on her. He wants her to continue to confide in him so that he wanted to be her savior. Like, he wanted that, like, ego boost, I guess. And so maybe he feels guilty now because that's, like, all he was thinking about. We don't know. So he's keeping it to himself. He promised her he's not going to tell anyone. But he's going to try in his own way to talk her out of it, to get her through it. Okay, we're going to end this reading there. This was reading 21. What are your theories? Who are your favorite characters? Put it in the comments. I love you guys. I love that you enjoy this as much as I do. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Tap the like and subscribe buttons and have a wonderful day.
How y'all feel out there?
I'm light years, call me eons. When the snare kick in, the beat is neon. Lights, yeah, I'm feeling magnificent. Care less what I'm up against.